Okay guys, so today and this week we're going to look at forms in HTML. So we use forms when we want to collect information from the user and then do something with it. So we see this, for example, if you want to buy something, you're asked to put in your name and address and your credit card and whatever. In this module, we're only interested in looking at how you specify the form in HTML and then send off the stuff that's been entered in the form to the next part of the process, which is typically a server somewhere, very often running PHP. So you might or might not in your CIT career do a module on programming that server to do whatever it is it does. But in this module, we're only interested in hoovering up the information from the form and sending it off to the PHP server. The PHP server then will do whatever it does. Okay? Obviously, if you're buying books, you know, a web page here all on its own isn't going to buy a book all by itself in HTML. It needs to send off to somewhere, you know, to see if that book is available, if it's in stock, how much it costs, all these things. We have a couple of modules at CIT. So soft6007 deals with HTML and CSS. soft6008 deals with JavaScript, which is a language you can use to program the page and add interactivity to it. And then there's another module, server-side web development, I think it's called, or server-side scripting, which deals with, say, PHP and doing PHP on a server. Also, you can imagine if you have an online shop, you have a database in there somewhere. That's another module. So all of these pieces can fit together. And depending on what course you're doing, you'll see more or less of those pieces. But it's important to understand where everything lives. Okay? And so here we have a form, and you can do various things. And we're going to look at each of these kinds of form elements. Now, as with HTML, you're not expected to know everything off the top of your head. You don't need to know all the possible tags. You just need to know how to look them up and understand how to make things work. Okay? So in HTML, we use a form element to specify a form. And then inside in the form, we'll have a variety of different kinds of inputs. Okay? A label is used to identify what the person's supposed to type in. If you just we're presented with a form and no labels, you just see things you're supposed to fill in, but how do you know this is where the name goes, this is where the phone number goes? You'd know none of these things. Okay? So in our form, we're going to have different kinds of inputs, and there'll be different HTML to specify each of those. So here, for example, we're talking about the type of the input is going to be text, and so we'll get a box there where we can have free-form text. If you specify that the type is a password, for example, it looks much the same, but you won't see the text when you type it. So that's something the browser does because you specified that it's a password, for example. Okay? So we'll see lots of different ones of these, right? In HTML5, there are some new things. I mean, they're all new to you, so it doesn't really matter to you. But there are some new things that allow you to say what kind of data you're expecting. And then if the user types in something that doesn't look right, the browser will have a tizzy fit on your behalf and won't accept that from the user. So if, for example, you're expecting an email address and the user types in something that doesn't have an @ symbol, well then it's not going to accept it and it won't send it off. There's very little point in sending off to the PHP server or whatever server you're using something that that can't possibly be right. Okay? There's no point in sending it. I mean, so if in your input you specify that the attribute is required, then the form won't get submitted until you put something in there. So if you say required, it'll insist you put something in. Okay? So in general, the form will just send off whatever's been entered, and if you put in nothing, that's okay. But if you specify the required attribute, it will insist that something is in there. Okay? Now, every element in the form must have a name attribute. If you don't put in the name attribute, the form will actually look fine, but the information that's entered into it won't get sent off to where it's going. So the name is what's used to send off the stuff to the server. And so no two elements can have the same name. And we'll look at that too. Okay? So you can have a text area, for example. That's one of the kind of things you can do. So you might use that for an address. And there you can, people can type in there as much as they like. You notice that some, you notice here that some browsers will support the option to stretch the text area to make it bigger if it's not big enough for what you want to type in. You can specify, and all these things, there are all these different bells and whistles you can specify. You might be able to specify whether you want it to scroll or not, things like that. So you can look these things up. We're just going to hit the main points today. Now, an element can also have an ID. So we have a name and an ID. Usually we use IDs when we're doing things in JavaScript and in CSS. So you might see some of those later in the module. The only reason we want to put an ID in here in our form is that, I'll show you that later, is to do with connecting the label to the input. Okay? You can put in default text if you want. That could just give people an idea of what the thing should look like. You can put that in or not. That's up to you. Okay? And you can do that using the placeholder as well if you want. You can even specify how big you want it. You can specify how many columns and how many rows. That's something you can put in the attributes as well. So you might want something to be really, really big, or small might be enough. Okay? Like I was mentioning, some browsers let you actually, pull that down so you can increase it yourself if you want. Different options there. And you can specify the maximum length of characters you want to be an input. So let's say, for example, you were going to input something and send it off as a tweet. Well, a tweet can only be, 140 characters, is it? So you wouldn't bother accepting anything longer because you wouldn't be able to fit that into a tweet, for example. Let me show you what autofocus does. So right now in this page, surname has the focus on it. Now name has the focus on it. So whichever thing is having stuff entered at that time, that's the one that has the focus. So you can specify one of these things, and of course only one of these things, to have the focus on it automatically when the page opens up. I guess by default it would be the first thing, but if you wanted the focus to be on surname when the page started first, you could put it there. It's hard to think of scenarios when you might want to do that, to be honest. But that's an option for you. So there's going to be a submit button then and a reset button. The reset button will clear everything that you've entered. And the submit button then is very important, because what that does is when you click that, it hoovers up all the information you've entered in and sends it off to the server. Now, we don't know what happens at the server, but obviously to do this right, you would have to communicate with, in real life with the person who's programming the server to know what things he's expecting and in what format and what names. So the names you send to the server. So if you're going to call, let's say, first name, or if you're going to call something, say, second name, if you give the box where they put in their surname, if you call that second name and you give that the name second name, that's how that's going to be sent. Okay? At the receiving end, the programmer there needs to know that that's called second name and not surname. So you need to agree the names of the elements there. But that's really the extent of your interface then to the PHP server. Okay, so like I said, you can specify the type of the thing you're looking for, and if it's a particular format that the browser knows about, it can insist on that and can give out if the user doesn't put that in. So what do you think would be the minimum requirements for an email address? Obviously, it has to have an @ symbol in it. And it has to have a dot after the @ symbol, doesn't it? And it has to have something before the @ and something between the @ and the dot and something after the dot. So something @ something dot something is okay. So the browser can check for that. I wonder if I have any example here of an email address. So if I say something @.com, it would probably not take that. Okay? It's given out to me. Now this is wonderful because it used to require quite a bit of programming to pull this off before. And now if you code it properly in the HTML, the browser can do it for you. Similarly, you can specify a date or a URL or a color. We can look at those. So some browsers, no, this used to be a programming assignment beloved of lecturers the world over. So it's popping up a calendar here now and I can pick any date I want. That used to be so much work you wouldn't believe. And now because you're saying to the browser, this piece of information here, I'm looking for a date. So it does then whatever it does. And, if we were doing this in Japan or even in France, we might see something different here. It would look different, but it would still pick up the date. Okay. You can put in a URL or not. If you don't put in a URL, it'll give out to you if you don't do it the right way. See, it's not happy there. This is my favorite, but it's not supported by all the browsers yet. You can pick a color. And then it cranks up whatever system the operating system uses for specifying colors. So on this Mac here, that looks like that. On a Windows machine, it would look like something else. And on an Android device, it would look different also.
So the browsers are actually different the way they render the elements, is that right, at the moment?
Some of them don't support some of them. So not all browsers support all of these new types properly. So if we were to open this up in, let's say Firefox, let's say Safari. This machine is slow, so you might regret this. So we look down here. Date of birth doesn't do anything special. Color doesn't do anything special. Okay, let's just see what Firefox does. No, they are standard. That's an important point. In the past, browsers did things differently, and some browser manufacturers would just make up their own tags. They would just make stuff up that would work in their browser. We don't have that anymore, thankfully. So these are standard features, but they're just not implemented in everything yet. Like I said, slow machine. So Firefox doesn't do the date thing either, but it does do the color, for example. Although it doesn't seem to be doing a great job of it. So there we go. Okay. So in time, all of these will be supported. What's particularly interesting is, let's say this was a form and you were doing it on your iPhone. Okay? If you were typing in an address, 1234 Rossa Avenue, you would have the keyboard, the full keyboard. If you were typing in a URL, though, there'd be some things you wouldn't have, and the keyboard might change. What's particularly interesting is that if you're typing in a phone number, you don't get the full keyboard, you only get the numeric keypad, because the browser knows while you're putting in a phone number, you don't need all those letters. So it can make for an interesting adaptive experience when you're on a handheld device. So that's pretty much what we just said there. Blah blah blah. No, so different kinds of things then. Some you will need, some not so much. You can have a list of things that drop down and you can pick one. So if it was like the 7 dwarfs, that makes sense because pop down of 7 things, not so bad. I find, for example, if you're asked to select your state in the US and there's 50 states, and then Washington DC can be very long, or sometimes on a website when it wants to know what city you want to fly to and you have to scroll through them all. I think there's a limit really to how many things you can have your pop down and still be useful. Some people do the dog on it. So you can see the syntax of that there. Okay. Range is a lovely one. Again, it's not supported by all of the browsers, but the ones that support it give you a slider. So if you want the person to input, say, a value between 0 and 10, they can slide up and down and it will change. And then when they click submit, it'll send off whatever the value was. What's really useful is, let's say you wanted a value between 0 and 200, but you only wanted to go in tens, so like 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. You can even specify that, which is great. Classics then are the radio buttons, okay? And it's important you understand the difference between radio buttons and checkboxes. These have become sort of our... See, when the sound is everywhere, it's of no use because everyone is just running for cover. Like, I mean, do you know? Anyway, now, so there's a difference between checkboxes and radio buttons, and that difference has become an important part of our, I guess, visual interface language, and we're supposed to understand what these things mean. I think sometimes it's only computing people understand what they mean, and they're shocked and horrified when people walking off the street and don't get what they mean. But so radio buttons are a bunch of options, and you can only select one of them, so only one of them can be selected. And it comes from old radios where to select a station you'd push down the button, and then select a different station, you'd push down another button, and the button you push down would pop up. So pushing down one pops up the other. Okay? So at the moment, 34 to 49 is selected, but if I select 25 to 34, then 34 to 49 becomes unselected automatically. So when you have a set of radio buttons, only one of them can be selected. So this part here, 1824, is what's displayed on the page. However, what's inside in value is what gets sent to the server as what was clicked on. So for 65 plus there, it doesn't send off 65 plus. It sends off to the server retired. And this is useful, of course. If this page was in several languages, you might find that the stuff displayed on the page, the text displayed on the page, was in French or in German or in Spanish, but that you would always send off the values that the PHP server was expecting, irrespective of the language. This is one of the instances where you would reuse the name, or you'd use the name more than once. See, if you use the name more than once, if I say amount in one part of the form, let's say I'm looking for the amount of 7-Up you want to buy, and then I say further down, I'm asking how many packets of Pringles you want to buy, and I use amount there as well. If I set the name of two elements to amount, then only one of them will get sent, probably the second one. So you can't reuse the name. It's slightly more complex than that. I'm kind of telling you a little lie, but it's in service of a bigger truth. So you don't reuse the name. Each name can only be used once, with the exception of radio buttons, because only one can be selected anyway. In fact, you must use the name because that's what connects these then as a set. So we know then these are a set of radio buttons that work together. Because if you have more than one set of radio buttons on the page, so let's say here you're selecting your age, here you're selecting the size of the shirt that you want, small, medium, large, XL. Well, like, you don't want a situation where you click on XL and then all the age ones get deselected. So you make a set of radio buttons by using the same name, and that connects them. Okay. Checkboxes then, on the other hand, allow for none or several or all of them to be selected independently. So you can click on sports and sports will be selected. You can click on movies and movies will be selected. You can unclick on movies, unselected. So we have some examples here, I think. So these are our radio buttons. Actually, as a general rule as well, you should ensure that one of the radio buttons is selected by default when the page loads. It doesn't look right if there's none selected. One should be selected always. So if I click on 65 plus, the 34 to 49 goes off. Whereas checkboxes, I can do what I like. So someone like me sees radio buttons and sees checkboxes and understands instantly that the things that have radio buttons, you must select one, whereas you can select the checkboxes independently. I don't know if you were to grab a random person off the street, would it be that obvious to them? I don't know. Maybe it is now. At this stage, people are used to forms. But sometimes in computing, we just make stuff up and forget to tell the rest of the world. Okay. We'll look at these in a second, and I'll come back to those as a point I want to make about those two. Quite a similar point, in fact. Now, going to tell you a little lie here now, but it's a good one. It's one you need. Okay. For checkboxes, you have to give each individual checkbox its own name. So unlike the radio buttons, you can't reuse the names of the checkboxes. Here's the truth. You can actually reuse the name provided you send them to PHP server as an array, and as long as it's expecting an array, everything will be fine. But that doesn't mean anything to you right now. Okay? So you must give each checkbox its own unique name. Otherwise you'll have problems. So if this was a pizza ordering website, you'd have topping 1, topping 2, topping 3, topping 4, or whatever. You couldn't just say topping and then have them select peppers and chicken. You'd have a problem. Okay, so drop down lists. You can have a list like this, which is very common, where you have to select a number of options. I think they are, like I was saying, only practical, I think, for small numbers of items. I mean, what we've got, I don't know if we've even got all 32 counties here. Maybe we do. No, we don't. We've got Munster and Connacht, and even that's a bit long, you know. So you can select one, okay, from here. What's interesting about this one is that they're grouped into, you know, groups. We have a Munster one and we have a Connacht one. You can't select Connacht. Connacht is just a heading, so to speak. Probably, I think most people don't know that you can select Clare, and then if you hold down a particular key, you can also select Kerry and Limerick. So you don't have to select just one, you can select multiple ones. I don't know how many people know that. I think very few, but I don't know. Did you know that?
What would happen then, say, if your address was whatever County Cork and you picked Kerry as well? What would it go to the server as Kerry or Cork?
Do you know what? I don't know. Let's find out. So we selected, okay, nothing actually happened there now. Okay. If it was only expecting one, then probably the last one. If it was expecting a set, then that's okay. I must check that out now. Clearly, the person that programmed this up didn't specify in the attributes that you can only select. No, where you have lived. Okay, so obviously their intent was you could have select many. Okay, where you're living now is typically only one. Although obviously, if you're rich, you may have many houses. Similarly, you can actually click on one, then hold the Shift key down, and click and select the first and the one you clicked on, and all the ones in between. Again, I don't know how many people know that. So, I mean, if you have an interface element and people don't know how to use it, you have to wonder how useful it is. You know.
What type of list is that?
That is drop down, I think. So the construct is a select. So that's the full code for that one there. So you can break them up into groups as well. What's interesting to note here is, once again, we have structures inside structures inside structures. So we have a select here, and then we've slash select here. And then we have an opt group, begin opt group, slash opt group, begin opt group, slash opt group, and then begin option thingy, slash option. So you have boxes inside boxes inside boxes.
Well, you put an option if you want to disable it.
How do you mean? Like,
So you have option disable Claire there, so you obviously can't pick Claire like that.
I don't know. There may be some reason. I don't know. Let's say they were classes, electives you could pick, and let's say we found out Claire was
After you pick one option for
was full or something. I don't know. I mean, you could contrive some scenario. Perhaps you want to list all the counties and you don't ship to Clare.
Yeah.
So it shows you that, it's not that, the person doesn't spend time looking for Clare. But, some of these things are of limited use or non-obvious use. Okay? So you can see the code for that. Is there anything else there I want to show you that's important? No. So, yeah. Okay. So in your form then, where you specify form, you're going to have a method and an action. And typically there are two methods you can use to send the information off. We're going to use post. Or are we going to use get? We're going to use get. Okay? So you'd say form method equals get, and then action equals, and we'll give you the URL then that you put in there. So it'll be blah 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 something.php, and we've programmed the server at the other end to send you back everything you sent it. So if you have a website that's specifying a pizza and you have your form and you've selected all the toppings and you send it off and it only comes back with one topping, then you know something has gone wrong. So the form should send back everything you've sent it. And then you can see if it's working or not. So we'll give you that piece of code anyway. Okay? And then you'll have a button on the page. That'll be a type submit. And then the value will be what appears in the button there itself. You can also include an image, which I think is of limited value myself, but some people like to do that. That's the submit button. So you have the HTML you need to specify the look of the page, but then you also have to make sure you've set it up right so that the names of the data are correct so they get sent off properly. And then you also have to ensure that you have the code up at the top right so that it actually gets sent where it's going.
Are the names on the elements, they'll be read by the process data PHP file, would that be right?
Sorry, say it again now?
You know that you said it's essential to write names on the elements?
Yeah, so they're received at the other end then as the names. So it'll say like first name equals Colin, surname equals Manning, county equals Cork, favorite color equals whatever the value is for the color. And the PHP server will just see those. So it just gets those values. So then it does then whatever it does with those values. But you would have had to have arranged with the programmer of the PHP server what those names are going to be.
Is it processed by the process data.php file then? Because it says action there, doesn't it? Does that mean it gets actioned by that file? So the data you submit from the form gets actioned by that file, which is obviously written, and it's placed this on the server, isn't it?
So the server does whatever it does with that information. And the server is programmed any possible number of ways. The one we're using is PHP server. And it'll do whatever it does. The one we're going to send you to is one that's just going to take all the stuff you sent it and send it back to you. So you can see that you can see what it received. But if it's in a shop, it's going to start to process your order and move to the next stage, and maybe send you back something looking for your credit card details or whatever. That doesn't answer your question, does it? Or I don't know.
Well, I suppose if it's the action, it says action process data.php.
All you do is put in a URL there. So you're just having
that refers to a file, doesn't it? Action process data.php. That's a PHP file.
be a PHP program, yeah.
File. So that's the actual file that processes the data on the form. Is that right?
Well, I mean, the file is just a file. Like it's just it's a PHP program,
Okay, I think I understand.
Yeah. So for us, that's like a black box. We send that into the PHP server, and it does whatever it does. Yeah, but our connection to that black box is the name of those variables. So we must have agreed the names with the programmer of the server. Any other questions? So I'll put these somewhere where you can find them, but really the example is nearly more useful. So I'll put a link to that too. And we'll be specifying your assignment soon as well. Okay? You'll have seen on the blog some, maybe you haven't, no. Would you have? No, doesn't matter. Okay.